Hello and welcome to the 5th Google Hangout at Tate Britain, the final one for this year. I'm Miranda Sawyer and I am urging you to unplug your jukebox and do yourself a favour as we explore the connections between music and art. Joining me to engage with this discussion, perhaps to sing, who knows? We've got 2 people here and 2 people down the line through the magic of the internet. We have Haroon Mirza. Haroon is an artist that combines a variety of, I'm reading this out, I might as well just say it, a variety of ready-made and time-based materials to create audio compositions and installation. His work explores the distinctions between noise, sound and music and the function and meaning of everyday objects. Adrian Shaw, hello Adrian, is part of the Tate's Learning Department and has been organising music events since the early 90s. He introduced large-scale music programming to Tate over 10 years ago. And these events, such as the recent Walk Records Late at Tate on Friday, massive success, often explore the boundaries between music, performance and art. Down the line, they're going to wave at us any minute, is Will Skeaping. Can you wave at us, Will? Will, hello.
Hi.
Will is a music producer and consultant. He's a former label manager at Lex Records, where he worked closely with rappers, authors and filmmakers and focused on collaborations between artists and musicians. He's currently making an album that unites English folk with vintage analog synthesizers, and yet he doesn't have a beard. It's amazing. And then there's Leif Podhajsky. He is an Australian artist and graphic designer. His bright and sometimes surreal works are featured on album covers and posters for musicians, including Mount Kimby, Licky Lee, and The Foals. Leif says his work explores themes of connectedness, the relevance of nature, and the psychedelic or altered experience. So I'm assuming you have plenty experience of festivals, Leif.
I have a beard also.
Oh yeah, go on, I see you qualify so much. Okay, we're going to open up with sound art, and we're actually going to open up with the Turner Prize. In 2010, Susan Phillips won the Turner Prize, but she was really the first kind of sound installation artist to win such a prestigious prize. And yet, if you think about the human experience right back to kind of cavemen with a kind of drawing on the wall, sound was really, really important. It seems very strange to me that sound art has only recently been winning an awards or given status. Do you want to take that up for me, Haroon, as a sound artist?
Yeah, I think one of the things is that sound and art have always existed, and it's just I think it's just a case of how you sort of categorize these things, because artists and musicians, you know, the sound organized is music essentially. So how you categorize these things is the question here, yeah, sorry.
What I was going to say was, if you think about what Susan's work was, and it really struck kind of home with people, I think, was when she had a very beautiful kind of lament underneath the bridge. So it's a gorgeous kind of thing to experience. And I wondered really if that kind of notion of experience something like that is what has raised the status of sound art, if you want to say it, within art in general.
Yeah, because the experience of listening to that piece Under the Bridge, I think I heard it in, I can't remember, or I think it might have been in Germany somewhere, maybe Münster or Kassel, one of those two. The experience of listening to a piece of music in that setting was completely different to listening to a piece of music on your headphones or at home or in a concert. So I think that experience is the thing that's most important in many ways.
That changes it from just a kind of musical thing to something that is actually sound art. Yeah. There's also MoMA had its first kind of major exhibition of sound art this year, which had presented work by 16 of kind of contemporary artists working with sound, including yourself. There was kind of, various reactions to it. But what that does, in essence, is give sound art a kind of status, doesn't it, Adrian?
Well, it's definitely an emerging disciplinary field, and it's interesting how certain things are coming into ascent, and sound art seems like it's one of those things that's... the thing with Susan Phillips is she's crossed over from... Sound art's always existed, but she's pulled it into contemporary art in a way that works. It's difficult to sort of exist in the art world doing sound art, but she seems to have she seems to, and because there's layered into that work, the way it seems to be taking it a bit further somehow. It seems to be.
We've got a VT we could have a look at actually of some of Haroon working. Are we allowed to see it, Haroon? Come on now, don't be shy.
Sure. Yeah.
Should we have a look?
The piece at the Tate, the initial thing with that work was the drummers. This was filmed during a wedding, so this sort of performative kind of ceremony is taking place, but there's the backdrop to this are these kind of drummers. I've edited each drummer into very short loops, but then they form their own patterns which change because the monitors turn on and off. Then I was interested in adding other sonic elements. The speech was more about taking something quite specific and reducing it back just to sonic material. You know, it's hard to understand what that guy's saying, but it's kind of irrelevant what he's saying. You know, the speech itself is more about convincing people of something. So the record player part is a simple principle of taking a current technology, an energy-saving light bulb, and putting it next to an outmoded technology, a transistor radio. Because you can create this noise with physical proximity, you can create various types of rhythm, you know, by either turning the light bulb on and off or making the radio pass by it, so that becomes a layer of sound in the composition. So the three elements together form one acoustic composition.
That's an interesting film to me because it's not just about sound, is it? There's a visual element, there's a kind of mechanical element to some of it. That's obviously very important in your work as well. Do you think that traditionally the visual component of artwork has been given higher status over the sound component?
Yeah, totally, I think so. I think it's a very sort of westernized thing that vision is more important than acoustic. Visual space is more important than acoustic space. And I think, I mean, it's a long sort of conversation, but I think it's got a lot to do with art and the history of art and how that's developed. But now it seems to be changing, you know, so if Western civilization has become oculocentric, which means, you know, we value the visual realm more than the acoustic or other senses, I think with these types of practices emerging, there could be a sort of, you know, a more sort of way of equalizing this sort of discrepancy. You know, so I treat my work, for instance, all the material in my work is the same. You know, I think objects are just as important as sonic material, and I work on those two things together. Both are composition. I'm composing music at the same time as I'm composing objects in space, visual material. And I don't really, well, I try not to distinguish between the two. I mean, you have to, but...
I suppose as well, philosophically, there's been a, you know, it's now a cross-disciplinary approach. You know, you think of, you know, you talk about the materiality of sound and, you know, sort of expanded ideas of experience in spaces and immersive spaces where they're not privileged in just the visual. Increasingly, there's these different elements are not being, they're on an equal level. You know, in your work, you know, there's the materiality of the sound, the sculpture, the look of it.
There's also cases, I think, and I think we've got a video which might illustrate this, where there are cases where where musicians respond to art in the way that artists also respond to music. But I think we've got quite a nice clip from with the band Everything responding to art in the Tate Britain.
Usually it starts with Jonathan. He'll have a melody or, you know, the majority of a song, and then we kind of piece it together as a foursome and, you know, put it through the mill.
With this, we did want to work differently, so we purposely didn't have any set ideas beforehand.
Alex is a big fan. I'm a really big fan. I actually went to art college just across the road in Chelsea. I've always thought Francis Bacon's the best.
first bit's kind of quite tense and intense as well. It sort of explodes in the second section.
There is an element of positivity in what we've done, and tension and negativity.
There's a sort of controlled chaos thing, which is very, very Francis Bacon.
There's something very sweet about that piece of film, I think, because it's actually just a band responding to some artwork. Will, I know that you've worked with musicians and artists kind of collaborating together, but there's something very intimate about that piece, that particular film, wasn't there? There's just a band responding to some art, making some music, not even an audience.
Yeah, I guess to a degree they might be sort of, not necessarily restricted, but the instruments they're using are sort of classic, as in that's a band setup.
It's an indie classic.
Exactly, and I think that there's no reason anymore and for anyone to feel restricted in anything they use. And it seems that the response to an artist or a painting or a work or any sort of artistic practice might be potentially more aggressive, and that may not have space on Radio 1 or in the mainstream. But responses to art, can be great when they're more visceral and potentially.
Are you saying
freer.
You don't like that?
No. I'm
You're
just saying go for it.
Fan?
Just saying, yeah.
Artists and musicians have of course worked together. The classic is Andy Warhol and the Velvet Underground, who wouldn't really have been the same if they hadn't been together. I mean, they literally would have been the same because Nico would have been working with them for a start, and they wouldn't have been presented in that same way. I wondered if we can think of any other examples of that amazing kind of collaboration between two different worlds. I mean, is there anyone that you could think of now that you would use give the same status, I suppose?
I would say Storm Thorgerson was up there for me with Pink Floyd. That was one of those collaborations that really.
Yeah, interesting. We've got a film from it. Should we see it now? We were going to see it later, but let's see it now.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Storm Thorgerson of Norwegian ancestry, and I'm a designer of album covers. I have done rather too many album covers for some people's liking, predominantly for Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, 10cc, and more recently, Muse, Cranberries, Biffy Clyro, good band, etc., etc. I probably first came across Magritte via my mother, and I think my mother rather indirectly encouraged my interest in art, particularly in painting. And Magritte was probably an early interest, I think because he dealt not with technique so much as with ideas, and some of them are quite funny. I like to look because it makes me smile. And I think that Magritte may have influenced other people because his ideas are quite easy to assimilate. They're not terribly complex. I think I took away from Magritte a sort of a love of oddity or oddness, or rather juxtaposition or contrariness. I used to play with the reality, so in a sense I have to set it up as a real thing which has been slightly twisted. That's the contrariness, the oddness.
That is interesting, isn't it, Leif, really? If you think about those works that Storm Thorgerson has done, they're very much wrapped around the music as well, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always with music. I think it's always about communicating the idea that's on the album, like the sounds that are inside it, and putting a visual to that. So yeah, I mean, his pieces were amazing because they were all shot in real life, like set up, and they were very surreal. Whereas like what I do is all digital, so I can make these other things that are quite surreal. But he did it all, right there in the camera. So yeah, it's quite cool.
You can use your imagination, and it will happen.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you ever regret the passing of the? He was working on very large album sleeves, wasn't he? Do you regret the passing of those days?
Yeah, I get that question a lot, but I think
you don't care. You like it little.
I don't care. Yeah, I think there's so many more platforms these days. Like it was always, that was the thing. The 12-inch was the piece of artwork. Nowadays we've got the internet, and there's banners, and you can do campaigns around different images and music videos and stuff. So there's this other visual element to a band or to a musician. I think it's exciting. I think it's more exciting than back then.
Of course you do.
Well,
we've got some stills of your work actually. Should we show some? Let's have a look. Where is it? Can we see it? Yes, we can.
I can see one. I can see.
You can see one. Do you want to talk us through it?
Yeah, this one's Bonobo, North Borders, that I just did for Ninja Tune Records. So that one's just come out. Yeah. That was quite an interesting project. I mean, we talk about vinyl and digital and stuff, and we did an amazing box set for the Bonobo one. This one's Mount Kimby on Warp Records. Kind of a modern take on jazz Blue Note album covers from the 60s. This was
quite Storm.
Yeah. This is a Tame Impala. This is Tame Impala's first album, In a Speaker. This is one of the first pieces I actually did. So it's all just this one's a digital piece. So just manipulating a photograph.
Thank you. I would actually like to talk about, as somebody who's recently interviewed Lady Gaga, she was very involved with Marina Abramovic, the performance artist, who is really pretty much at the top of her game, I would say. And she has worked with really quite a few high-profile artists, hasn't she? She's worked with Anthony Hegarty of Anthony and the Johnsons. She's worked with Lady Gaga. She did the very strange thing with Jay-Z, where he performed Picasso Baby for 12 hours, and she danced very intensely with him. This was part of the kind of performance art, I suppose, training that she's given these musicians. But I wondered really, and this is kind of, I'm throwing it really out to anybody, whether those collaborations can ever really work, because she's taking her practice into the music, but I'm not sure how much the music is informing her practice. I'm looking at you, Haroon, actually.
I think, sometimes collaborations occur for various reasons. And I think some collaborations, in the case of Marina Abramovic, it's more to do with, what these people and personalities are and stand for. So it is a literal thing where music meets art, and she's very much kind of trying to be a protagonist of this ideal somehow. Whereas sometimes collaborations between musicians and artists, or designers and artists, or musicians and designers, come from a mutual sort of investigation or curiosity about something, and through conversation and through just experimentation. And I think there's something different. I'm not kind of sort of judging anyone in terms of like why they would collaborate, but I think the context of the collaboration is really important.
Yeah, whether it's a genuine wish to collaborate or whether it's just...
Yeah, it's not even that. I think it could be a genuine wish to collaborate, but it's more about the fact that you're collaborating than the fact that there's something interesting to work through, or it comes out of a conversation, or it comes out of a sort of mutual inquiry.
Yeah.
To a degree.
Will, what about you? Because you've worked with artists and musicians, and when we were watching the Everything clip, you seem to indicate that actually what you prefer is something a bit more dynamic and explosive.
Well, I think that when it comes to collaboration rather than meeting, I think a collaboration is something that goes a lot deeper than just like putting a CD in a sculpture of a skull, as I think Damien Hirst once did. And I think that the art world obviously has an exclusivity, and there's a mass market appeal to music in general that we can all sort of get our heads around. And I think that to a degree, lots of artists like the idea of being a rock star, which has that global appeal, and lots of rock stars really like the integrity and exclusivity that goes with being an artist. And I think that to a degree, when those two things are sort of meshed together, you get that, you can see where there's a perfect storm of why these two things should be there and why everyone would like to do things. But if it's just superficial, and there have been quite a lot of superficial art meets music moments recently, and often around art fairs, and I think it's it's great if you can get people to do things. And the problem with getting big heavy hitters together to do big major projects is schedules. And I worked on a project recently with Keith Tyson and Mike Patton and various other members of big bands together, and that was a really, really difficult thing to make happen. And it's still ongoing, and hopefully that'll be coming out at some point next year on Lex Records. But when you've got the bigger the artists, the more interesting the project's potential. but more difficult. And I think that the less appeal of having smaller artists or mid-level artists doing things together, and that's a shame. And it'd be good to get more exposure and more kind of opportunities for that to happen. And sort of.
Yeah. I'm going to turn to you now, Adrian, because that's kind of what your bag. But before we talk about kind of things like Late at Tate, I'd quite like to talk about the idea of kind of artists moving into the musical arena. So the people I'm thinking of, literally when I was in the cab coming to this session, I got pinged up on my email that Martin Creed has got a new album coming out. And of course, we've had kind of Dinos Chapman making really quite interesting noises, and Bob and Roberta Smith. And there are people within very respected artists who are moving into the kind of music world, rather than making sound art, they're actually making music, aren't they?
Yeah, I think getting back to what you were saying as well, that there's got to be a rigor, there's got to be an understanding and a subtle working together for something to work. Of course, Martin Creed with his I mean, I don't know whether you call it, it's sound, I don't know whether you call it music, I don't know what you call it, but he's trying to explore his concepts through sound, and whereas I'm often working with artists and musicians trying to pull these people together so that they work in a way that's quite subtle and nuanced. And when you're doing things in a gallery space, you can, if it's rushed or if it's not given time to fully develop as a concept, you can get that quick win, but it's disjointed and it's not, to fully push something so it sort of expands in its fullest form. And that's something that I'm interested in. Often I'm in discussions for years, 2 or 3 years on an idea, pushing it backwards and forwards and working with it, before we work on a project. And that is quite tricky, because obviously art's working on a lot of levels, and
I was going to ask her, how long did you work on the warp thing, the Jeremy Dell?
You see, Ed, that was just what I was going to talk about.
That one was curated by Sean Curtis, who's a colleague of mine in the Young People's Programme, and that came together. I mean,
Can I just explain what it is? Just to say that this is last Friday in Tate Britain, part of the Later Tate series. There was a kind of meeting of Jeremy Deller and Warp Records, wasn't it? And it was specifically associated with a piece of work that he did for his Turner Prize winning exhibition, wasn't it? Which was
The History of the World.
The History of the World. And we have the VT because we are prepared. Can we roll it?
It's all about this. I made a drawing to justify the music, and it's really what was going on in my mind at the time about why these two genres could actually have something in common. The climax or highlight will be the band performing, which is This Made Life, This Come to Life. They will be playing 7 or 8 tracks which they originally recorded in '97 by the KLF, by 808 State, by a guy called Gerald, Kevin Saunderson.
We've got a lot of old brass band people, some of who were very traditional, and when the music came down it was a little bit of a culture shock. But Jeremy explained it very well in that he was trying to get 2 working class elements of music and bring them together under very different guises.
It's great. There were people in the audience going, what was that? What was that track?
That's great, wasn't it? A brass band playing What Time Is It, Love, by the KLF. We were all at this evening, but we didn't know we were all at this evening. I'm going to go to Leif. Leif, what was the success of that Friday night for you?
I just loved being in the gallery when there was, it was at night time and there was a whole different crowd 3,000 people inside the gallery, people queuing outside. So it was quite a different experience from coming in the daytime and looking at all these masterpieces. So it was kind of a fusion of those two. But yeah, it was a great night. It was quite packed.
Yes, it was quite fast. Adrian, it must have been deemed a massive success because you had queues around the block. Did it achieve what you wanted it to achieve, and what was that?
Well, I think for Sean and for Warp and for Jeremy, I think it achieved everything it wanted. It was an amazing night, and it brought back again how sound, the materiality of sound, how it transforms a space. It's not only the sort of psychological, emotive aspects of the sound, and in terms of the things that were layered into that piece, the brass band, acid house, the way that they're layered with kind of meaning in themselves. But there's also a physical aspect to sound. It's loud. These sub-bass sounds, and the way that sound escapes through the gallery. It's dirty. There's sound bleed. It's this mercurial stuff that changes your concept of where you are. Reframes works, allows them to sort of escape the shackles of that kind of that daytime. These kind of the way that these barriers maybe all.
It's very interesting that, because I do think, I was there and I did really feel that, and it seems very basic, doesn't it, that in order to get people to relax around, I don't know what we call fine art, you need a kind of something that will make them feel at ease, and that thing is very often music, because people feel very used to music, don't they? They feel like they can comment on it as part of their lives, go straight to their emotions. And I know that you, Haroon, with that, because you're very acoustically minded, some of the acoustics you didn't like, but you were looking at art while you were listening to the music bleeding in, weren't you?
I actually ended up. I was my wife and 1-year-old babies, so we were looking for not. We didn't want to go into and the acoustics in there were a bit strange at the back because it was so busy, and unless you were at the front, it was a bit strange. So we actually we went to see the show. There's the painting show that's on at the moment with Thomas Apps and who else is in it? There's Gillian Carnegie and others, and it was really quiet in there because I think you need to be a member or something, or you need to pay or something to be in there. And my wife has a Tate card, so we went in, and it was really quite an experience to just be in the gallery like that and look at these works. But you could hear, the music. I can't remember who was playing at the time, but you could hear it coming through, and although it was distorted, it kind of gave it a very strange and unique atmosphere. It was a really brilliant way to see a show for me, and I really enjoyed that part of it.
Did you find, which is what I felt, was that there are certain points I was very happy to be in the environment, but I still couldn't help feel slightly tense around because there is a nature to going to see music, which is an experiential, communal, possibly slightly drunk feel that feels slightly dangerous within an art gallery.
I was kind of excited by that. I was almost like in a perverse kind of way thinking, what if someone does trip over and, fall onto this sculpture? What would happen, And that was like, I don't know.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things for me as well is that the dualism between the viewer, or the audience member and the artwork, or, what's happening gets warped in some way, And I was thinking that towards the end when I was watching Dark Star, and the whole thing was coming together. Often in art galleries, you're a single person. You talk about the communal aspect of looking and how problematic that is. Generally speaking, it's you, it's the artwork, and it's one-on-one. And then in these environments, someone like Dark Star, whose work is quite visceral, and you visualize things when you're listening to it. It allowed it to fully expand in the space, and the audience. There was this throbbing mass and this pulsating kind of. It became this organic thing, where there was no separation between the band, the works. It came together in quite a.
I just wanted to throw to Will, because I know that Will couldn't get in. I don't want it to sound really terrible. But I'm interested in the idea that Grayson Perry mentioned in his Reef lectures, actually, that people feel that they can comment on music or be part of music quite freely because they feel qualified to do that, and they don't necessarily feel that with art. Do you think that music can then lead people to feeling a bit more relaxed around fine art?
Definitely. I think it's a really good way in because of the sort of universality of it and the fact that we have sort of music in the background for all of the time. But I guess the function that art fulfills for lots of people does require a degree of sort of separation and thoughtfulness and isolation, perhaps, which music we can have on in the car and anywhere and be distracted. And I think art's job is to distract you into a kind of different zone, which is perhaps more concentrated. But yeah.
And also there's an emotional element. I think that you can get definitely you can get emotional if you have time with art, but there's a very direct emotional link, isn't there, to music? I mean, do you find that you use that, Haroon, deliberately?
I wouldn't say I use it deliberately, but I think if something works on me at an emotional level, then it may work on someone else. So I might use some sonic material that does something to me. But I don't think it's not a deliberate thing, I don't think, for me. But it's very clear that sound is more emotive than it is the most emotive form of art. And I think it's a powerful thing,
What about you, Leif? Do you ever, this is a really basic question, but I'm always interested in this. Would you work on a band that you didn't like the sound of?
I get that question a lot too.
It's interesting though.
I mean, I can always take something from any sort of music, but I try to definitely work with people that I really love their music, because it's so much easier to create something that you feel connected to also. And I use music a lot in my work, and sometimes it's not always the band that I'm doing artwork for. It's something. Sometimes it's like something that's quite longer pieces with maybe no vocals. And it kind of frees my mind, and then it feels like it kind of comes through me, and then I can create this thing that kind of comes through me. It's kind of, the music and the artwork kind of go hand in hand. Yeah, it's aesthetic. Yeah.
Okay. I suppose this is an easy question to finish out with, but if we were going to think of offering a nice piece of music to people, which that would open their minds to art, what should we choose? And you can choose something Christmassy if you want. It's nearly up to Christmas. You can have Mariah Carey's "All I Want for Christmas Is You." I don't know.
808 State. Or at the moment, there's Yuri Suzuki's jukebox piece at Tate Britain, which is really interesting. And interestingly, in all aspects of my life, there's music, and then I come into work and there's no music, generally speaking. But Yuri Suzuki's jukebox at the moment, it's got Sunday Morning on there, the Velvets, and I often stick that on when I come into work, so I can listen to it up the stairs.
That's a very beautiful thing.
It's a beautiful thing. So yeah, I think maybe that track. I always like it. It's a bit Christmassy with those little bells at the beginning.
Yeah, that'll do. I think that'll do nicely. Haroon?
I honestly can't think of anything.
That's all right. We could just stick Sunday Morning. It's quite nice. We could all hum it.
Just John Cage's 433, and you can hear each other.
You can relax. Yeah. What about you two down the line? Have you got anything you want us to listen to?
Yeah, I think Pansonic, any of their output on Sarko Records, which is incredibly just gets deeper and deeper and deeper, and before you know it, you're probably away with halfway down the tape. So, yeah.
And Leif, what about you?
Probably someone like Forest Swords or Goat. I like those two at the moment.
Yeah, anything like that. To be honest, I would recommend looking at art with music on full stop. You can come in, bring what you like. It doesn't really matter. You could listen to the Wombles and it would be all right, to be honest.
MP3 player.
MP3, it's amazing, isn't it? All right, well, thank you very much for joining us on our Google Hangout Music Meets Art. And I wish you all a very early happy Christmas. I'm sorry about that, but you have to.